It was 10:14 p.m. when my phone buzzed under my pillow. A video from my daughter-in-law. I tapped it open, blurry-eyed, and there was my grandson, Sammy, softly singing the lullaby I used to hum to him when he was just a baby. Then he whispered, "I miss you, Nana, please help Daddy." My heart stopped. The room smelled faintly of lavender oil, from the cloth I kept tucked near my pillow to calm my nerves at night. But no scent in the world could soothe the way my chest clenched. The phone trembled in my hands. I pressed replay, needing to hear it again, to make sure I hadn't imagined it. That soft voice, his little voice, wrapped around a song only he and I ever shared. And then that whisper, not a plea, a cry. I sat up, kicking off the old quilt my mother made me 50 years ago, the stitching frayed but strong. My slippers scraped the floor as I shuffled to the kitchen, hands shaking, mouth dry. I made chamomile tea out of instinct, the way I always do when I feel the ground shift under me. The kettle hissed, the cup warmed my palms, but I couldn't taste a thing. Something was wrong, very wrong. I hadn't seen David, my son, in weeks, not since Sammy's birthday party, where Jenna barely looked me in the eye. There had been tension, sure, but this was a storm. And my little boy, my grandson, was caught in it. I replayed the video a third time. Sammy looked tired, not sick, but different. There was something in his eyes, something too old for his 6 years. My gut clenched in the way it used to when David was a teenager and would come home late smelling of beer and regret. I knew that tone, that silence behind the song. I reached for my rosary, hanging on the hook by the back door. Not because I needed to pray, but because the feel of the beads grounded me. Cold, round truths in a world that had gone soft with lies. Jenna had sent the video. No message, no explanation, just the song, just the whisper. I opened our last text thread. Weeks old. A photo of Sammy in a Halloween costume. Spider-Man with his mask pulled up and a chocolate bar smeared on his cheek. I'd responded with a heart. She never replied. I called her. Straight to voicemail. Tried again. Same. I didn't leave a message. I wanted her to pick up and say something. To tell me what Sammy meant. To tell me why I felt like I was about to be dragged into something I couldn't undo. The digital clock on the stove blinked 10:46. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the wood grain with one finger like I used to when David was in the hospital with pneumonia at age 8. That same fear crept in now, slow, heavy, paralyzing. The kind that makes you bargain with time. I didn't know what I was about to lose, but I could feel it circling. And I wasn't going to wait quietly for it to strike. I didn't even eat breakfast. The toast sat untouched on the counter, cold and curling at the edges, the butter soft but useless. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Jenna to call, to say more, to explain. Instead, she finally texted, "David's been in a car accident. He's unconscious. No insurance. We need to act fast." The bank still smelled like old carpet and stale air freshener. I had to sign 3 forms, show 2 IDs. The teller, a young man with sleepy eyes and chipped nails, glanced at me like he wanted to ask if I was sure. But he didn't. They never do when you say, "family emergency." My hand trembled as I counted the bills in the envelope. $18,000. Almost everything I'd saved since my retirement from the library. Years of skipping vacations, reusing tea bags, mending the same sweater over and over again. All of it, gone in minutes. I stood in the parking lot afterward, watching the morning clouds gather like bruises over the town. I held that envelope like it was some kind of ransom. Which, in a way, it was. The steering wheel was hot under my fingers. My old car still had that faint smell of cinnamon from the time Sammy spilled his applesauce pouch on the seat. That little accident had made me laugh. Now it felt like a ghost. Jenna didn't pick up when I called. She answered with a choked voice when I tried again. "He's in bad shape, Mom," she said between sobs. "I can't do this alone. We need to cover the hospital up front. Please, he doesn't have much time." "Which hospital?" I asked. But she just kept crying. "Please, just send it. I'll text you the account. I didn't send it right away. I sat with the envelope in my lap for a long while, fingers pressing hard into the paper until it creased. There was no proof, no name of a hospital, no police report, no nurse, just her voice and Sammy's whisper echoing in my head. Still, it was my son. My only son. And if there was even a chance he was lying in a hospital bed somewhere without care. I drove straight to the UPS store and wired the money. Jenna had texted the routing number. She even added a little broken heart emoji. I ignored it. The machine beeped, the receipt printed. It smelled faintly of ink and burned metal. I folded it once, neatly, and slid it into my purse behind the photo of David and Sammy at the beach. The one where David is lifting him in the air and they're both laughing, mouths wide open. By the time I got back to the house, it was almost noon. My hands felt raw from gripping the steering wheel. My chest was tight, and my knees ached with each step up the porch. But my mind was already somewhere else, replaying every second of that lullaby. That whisper, "Please help Daddy." I had helped. I'd done my part. But something inside me, some ancient, stubborn voice, was starting to stir. Not angry yet, but awake. She was always polite, always measured. The kind of woman who smiled without showing teeth and answered questions with just enough detail to end the conversation. From the start, I knew she didn't want me too close. And I, trying to be the good mother-in-law, kept my distance. The day of their wedding, she wore a cream-colored dress that looked like it belonged in a magazine, sleek, expensive, not a wrinkle out of place. David looked nervous. He kept adjusting his tie, a habit from childhood whenever he felt cornered. I handed him my embroidered handkerchief before the ceremony. He slipped it into his pocket without a word. That was the last time I felt needed. After the wedding, Jenna managed everything. Holidays were already planned, visits were complicated, and David's phone calls got shorter. I'd get a birthday card, maybe a group photo from some vacation I wasn't invited to. He stopped calling me Mom. Started saying Ruth more often. But then Sammy was born. Oh, that boy. The first time I held him, I couldn't stop crying. He had David's chin, my father's ears, and the softest little sigh when he slept in my arms. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and roses. Jenna's mother had brought a huge bouquet. She didn't want me staying long. Said she was tired. I left without a fuss, biting the inside of my cheek so I wouldn't cry. A few weeks later, I started receiving short video clips. Jenna sent them in the evenings, just before bed. Sammy reaching for a toy, babbling nonsense, taking his first unsteady steps. My phone would buzz, and I'd stop whatever I was doing to watch, tea in hand, the same blanket over my knees. It became a ritual, my tether to him, to David. I saved every video, labeled each one. Sammy giggles, Sammy first spoon, Sammy kisses Nana on screen. Sometimes he'd say, "Night night, Nana," and blow a kiss with those chubby fingers. I'd kiss the screen back, whispering, "Good night, my love." Even though he couldn't hear me. Jenna rarely replied when I texted back. A heart emoji here, a thanks, there. No real conversations. But the videos kept coming, and I convinced myself that was enough. I didn't want to cause waves. I'd seen friends lose access to their grandchildren over one sharp word. I wasn't going to be that kind of mother-in-law. But the night she sent that lullaby, it was different, too specific, too intimate. That song was mine and Sammy's. I hummed it every time I rocked him to sleep, just like I did for David. She had to know that. She had to. And when Sammy whispered, "Please help Daddy," something snapped. A line crossed. My grandson had been the only thread keeping me tethered to this fractured family. And now I feared he was being used as bait. I sat in the living room with my knitting untouched beside me, the ball of yarn rolling slowly onto the carpet, unraveling itself as if in mourning. I had tried not to pry. But love doesn't stay silent forever. I couldn't name it exactly, just a tightness in her voice, like a violin string pulled too far. The usual flatness was gone, replaced by a breathless urgency that didn't sit right in my bones. I've spent a lifetime reading people's tones, between bookshelves and church pews. And Jenna? Jenna was hiding something. I didn't tell her I was coming. If David was unconscious in a hospital bed, I didn't need permission to see him. I was his mother. I had packed a small overnight bag before sunrise, folded 2 changes of clothes, tucked in a paperback novel I never seemed to finish, and wrapped my old cardigan around the handle. The scent of lavender from my pillow lingered on its collar. The cab smelled faintly of pine air freshener and yesterday's fast food. I kept one hand on my purse and the other gripping the strap of my bag like a lifeline. The driver didn't talk, which I appreciated. I needed silence. I needed to think. The hospital Jenna mentioned was St. Andrew's. I hadn't been there in years, not since Mary's husband had his gallbladder out. The place hadn't changed much. The lobby was still too cold, the lighting too white. I stepped up to the front desk, cleared my throat, and asked for my son. David Carlson, I said, spelling it out slowly. Admitted sometime last night, I believe. Car accident. The receptionist, a young woman with a pierced nose and eyes tired from too many overnight shifts, typed something into her computer. Her nails clicked like small warnings. She frowned. No, Carlson has been admitted here in the past 72 hours. I felt my breath catch. Are you sure? Maybe under another name? A trauma case? She checked again. Nothing. I nodded stiffly, thanked her, and walked out, the automatic doors whooshing open with too much cheer for how my chest felt. The air outside was thick with exhaust and morning heat. My hands gripped the straps of my bag tighter. I tried Mercy General next. Then Eastview. Both within 10 miles. Same story. No David Carlson. No accident reports. Nothing. By the time I got back to the cab stand, my legs ached. My blouse clung to me, too hot for the cardigan, too cold inside without it. I pulled it tighter anyway. A habit. A shield. I called David's office. His assistant, Lisa, chirped through the line. Oh. He's at the real estate conference in Denver this week. Want me to have him call you when he's back? I didn't respond. My ears were ringing. I hung up. I stood there in the hospital parking lot, surrounded by humming traffic and the distant wail of sirens. And I understood something, deep in my bones. Jenna had lied. And if she lied about this, what else had she twisted? The weight of my empty bank account pressed against my ribs, heavier than any suitcase. The wind picked up and tugged at the loose thread in my sleeve, one I'd meant to fix weeks ago. I should have trusted my instincts. But I wasn't going to sit in that cab again, shoulders hunched, lips sealed. No, I was going to fight back. Quietly, carefully, but I would not be played for a fool. It felt like standing in quicksand. Each empty record pulled me deeper. I visited 3 hospitals, all with the same answer. No David Carlson. No accident. No unconscious patient waiting for his mother to sit beside him. And yet, the image of Sammy singing, whispering that terrible plea, played on loop behind my eyes. Even my grip on the cab door felt weaker now, as if every answer was sapping my strength. The vinyl seats were hot from the sun, and I could smell my own worry, sour, clinging to my skin like a second shirt. The cardigan lay in my lap, limp and wrinkled. I had the driver take me home, but not before I asked him to stop by David's office building. I'd been there once years ago, when he got promoted. He had brought Sammy down to the lobby to greet me because Jenna had forgotten I was coming. I waited outside while people streamed in and out, dressed in business casual and clutching iced coffees. I stared at the revolving doors until my reflection in the glass blurred. Eventually, I called the number I had for the main office. Hi, this is Ruth Carlson. I'm trying to reach my son, David. Oh sure, the woman said. He's at that real estate seminar in Denver all week. Should be back Thursday. Want his email? I ended the call without answering. Denver. A seminar. Not a coma. The money I'd sent might as well have gone into a fire. I could still feel the envelope in my lap, the weight of it. $18,000. I'd counted each bill like a prayer, believing it was saving his life. Back home, the air in the house felt stale. Too still. I opened the windows, let in the dry August breeze. My tea kettle was still full from the night before. I poured the water out slowly, listening to the hollow echo as it struck the sink. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I sat down and wrote everything out, every text, every video, every odd conversation. I filled 4 pages. My handwriting wavered in places, especially when I described Sammy's voice. Please help Daddy. I wrote that sentence 3 times. I smoothed the hem of my blouse repeatedly, like I used to do when I was nervous during parent-teacher conferences. The gesture didn't help now. Nothing did. I had no proof yet, but my instincts were no longer whispers. They were shouts. And I needed someone to hear them. Someone who would believe me. Who had walked a path like mine. So I reached for the phone again. This time, I called Mary. Mary doesn't waste words. She never did. Not when her daughter married that charming mechanic who drained her savings and left her in debt. Not when she had to move back in with her sister for 2 years. She picked up after 1 ring, her voice calm and steady as ever. I told her everything, every single detail. I was sitting in the living room, wrapped in the crocheted shawl Mary gave me the Christmas after Harold passed, thick yarn, deep burgundy, warm as truth. The scent of peppermint oil lingered in the fibers. It always did. She used to dab it on her wrists to keep headaches away. When I finished, there was silence. Not disbelief, not confusion, just that low, measured voice. This sounds calculated, Ruth. Not desperate, calculated. Her words felt like bricks, steadying my spinning mind. I think she's been preparing you for this, she added. Sending those videos. Keeping the connection just warm enough. Conditioning you. I closed my eyes. I could still hear Sammy's voice. I wanted it to be real. I wanted him to have meant those words. But now, I wasn't sure whose voice I'd really been hearing. She used him, I said softly. She used you, Mary replied. And through you, she used him. The kettle clicked off behind me. I hadn't even realized I'd turned it on. I poured the hot water over a chamomile bag, hands trembling, the steam fogging my glasses. I didn't sip it, just held the cup close for comfort. What do? I asked, though I already knew. Get legal help. Now. Before it gets worse. Worse. The word settled like dust in my lungs. After we hung up, I walked through the house, touching things like I was saying goodbye. My wedding photo, David's high school yearbook, Sammy's crayon drawing of a rocket ship taped to the fridge. I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay under my mother's quilt, listening to the old grandfather clock tick like a heartbeat. Tick, tick, tick. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sammy's lips move in that video. Please help Daddy. But who told him to say it? Who was holding the camera? The next morning, before the sun even cracked the sky, I made a list. Bank, lawyer, print everything, every message, every receipt. I put it all in a manila folder and tucked it inside my tote bag, right next to the photo of Sammy in his Spider-Man mask. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my family. And I was done being quiet. The receptionist was still arranging her pens when I walked in, but she recognized me. I'd used the same small law firm for years, wills, house paperwork, the quiet business of growing old with dignity. But that morning, there was no dignity in me. Just urgency wrapped in a cardigan and clutched fingers. The office smelled faintly of lemon polish and tired carpets. I could hear the air conditioner humming above, steady as a metronome. I sat in the worn leather chair across from Gerald's desk and placed the manila folder between us like an offering. He glanced at it, then at me. Walk me through it. I told him everything. The video, the call, the transfer, the lies. He didn't interrupt, just nodded occasionally, his wedding band tapping softly against his ceramic mug every time he reached for his coffee. The mug read, "Old lawyers never die, they just lose their appeal." When I finished, he exhaled slowly and said, "We'll start by freezing any linked accounts. Then we file a fraud claim with your bank." His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "And you'll want to petition for a restraining order. She's manipulated you emotionally, and used your grandson to do it." Hearing it out loud felt like sandpaper across my heart. But it was also a strange relief. Finally, someone else had seen the trap I'd stepped into. He helped me fill out the paperwork. Every form felt like a confession. Every signature a small rebellion. We moved fast. Within 2 hours, my accounts were protected, my statements flagged, and a case opened with the fraud department. Gerald sent everything electronically and handed me copies in a blue plastic folder, thinner than I expected. Before I left, he looked me in the eye and said, "She may come at you again. Emotionally, legally, even through your grandson. Don't respond unless we're involved. Every interaction needs to be documented." I nodded, smoothing the corner of my blouse. I always do that when I feel things slipping out of control. On the drive home, the sky had brightened. Sunlight poured over the houses like nothing was wrong. Like no one had been betrayed. Back at home, I placed the blue folder beside my tea canister. I lit a lavender candle, not for calm, but for focus. That scent always clears my head. And then I sat with my phone in my hand, waiting for her next move. It came sooner than I expected. "Where's the money, Ruth? You said you'd help." No greeting, no softness, just accusation, sharp and direct like a stone through glass. My hands went cold. I stared at the message, then at the framed photo of David and Sammy on my mantel. David was holding Sammy on his shoulders, both of them grinning at something just out of frame. That photo used to bring me joy. Now it felt like a window into a life I was no longer welcome in. I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Another video. This time, it was Sammy crying. His little face was blotchy, his voice hiccuping with sobs. Jenna's arm was wrapped around him tightly, too tightly, her voice murmuring off camera, "Tell Nana what you just told me." And then Sammy said, sniffling, "Nana made Daddy cry." I watched it once. Then again. My lips went numb. There it was. The cruelty. Cold and surgical. I wasn't just being manipulated, I was being cast as the villain. In Jenna's version of the story, I had betrayed David. Broken Sammy's heart. Failed them all. And now she was teaching my grandson to carry that script like a banner. The mug in my hand slipped slightly. Tea spilled onto my lap. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and placed the phone face down on the counter. I poured the remaining tea down the sink. It smelled faintly of honey and lemon, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. I pulled the blue folder from beside the canister and added the new video. Forwarded it to Gerald with the subject line, "New footage. Urgent." My hands were shaking, so I wrapped them around my old ceramic mixing bowl, cool, heavy, comforting. I used to bake banana bread in it every Sunday when David was little. He would beg to lick the spoon, even when the batter had no sugar yet. He never cried like that. Not even when he broke his arm. This wasn't Sammy. Not truly. This was Jenna, using his little voice like a blade. I curled up in the armchair, blanket over my knees, rocking slightly. I hadn't done that in years. Not since Harold died. And in that moment, I knew something deep and unmovable. This wasn't just about a fraud claim or a bank account. This was about my place in my family. And I would not let her erase me. Not quietly, not kindly, but with truth. And truth was just starting to gather. It arrived in a cream envelope, hand-delivered by a process server who barely made eye contact. I signed for it in my front hall, still wearing my housecoat and clutching a dish towel. The moment I closed the door, I leaned against it, the paper trembling in my hands. A restraining order. I never imagined I'd need one against someone I once called family. The order was clear. Jenna could not contact me directly, indirectly, or through Sammy. No more texts. No more videos. No more twisting my grandson's words into sharpened spears. Gerald had also filed a cease and desist for emotional coercion. "She may not be breaking laws," he'd said, "but we can document the abuse." That phrase stayed with me, document the abuse. It made all of this feel both surreal and chillingly real. I placed the papers in the blue folder, then tucked the folder beside my favorite cookbooks, right between the one with David's childhood chili recipe and the tattered pie book Harold gave me on our 10th anniversary. It felt right, putting it near things I loved. Like protection. That night, I made oatmeal cookies. The house filled with the smell of cinnamon and browned butter. I didn't need the sugar, but baking steadied my hands. I even used the chipped mixing bowl again, the one with the little crack down the side I refused to replace. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. No lullabies, no phone buzzing at midnight. Just the steady tick of the grandfather clock and the weight of the quilt tucked under my chin. In the morning, I sat by the window with my tea, real tea this time, strong and unsweetened, and watched the mail truck roll past. No news from Jenna, no calls from David, just silence. It was a strange kind of victory. Brief, fragile, but real. Later that day, Gerald called. "We've made enough of a paper trail to hold her accountable if she pushes further," he said. "But be careful. People like her, they don't always back off quietly." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I smoothed the hem of my blouse again, then stopped myself. I didn't want to look nervous anymore. Outside, the wind had picked up. The wind chimes by the porch sang a soft, uneven song, like Sammy used to when he made up silly tunes while playing with his toy piano. That memory didn't sting the way it had before. Not because it was healed, but because now I was holding it for me, not letting Jenna twist it into a weapon. And I knew this wasn't the end. She wasn't finished, but neither was I. I was folding laundry in the living room, dish towels, old flannel pajamas, the cardigan I'd worn to the lawyers. The scent of dryer sheets clung to the fabric, warm and nostalgic, like a simpler time when the worst thing I worried about was David leaving Legos on the stairs. The phone rang, and when I saw his name on the screen, I froze. I answered on the third ring. "Mom?" His voice was hesitant, dry, like he'd rehearsed the word and still wasn't sure if it would land. "I'm here," I said, sitting down on the edge of the couch. My knees cracked like old hinges. There was a pause. Then, "Why did Jenna say you were threatening us?" My mouth went dry. So that was the new story. I pressed my palm against my chest, grounding myself. The knit of my blouse was soft, worn thin from years of wear, comforting, like a second skin. "David," I said slowly, "I saw the videos. I heard Sammy. I know what she sent. I know what she said." He didn't reply. "I went to the hospitals. I called your office. You were never in an accident." Silence. I saw our Sammy, used like a pawn. Lied to, or coached, or worse. A long exhale. Then, finally, "I was never in the hospital." My eyes closed. I let the words settle. "I never asked her to call you," he added. "She told me you were trying to start trouble again. That you were making up stories to get attention." His voice cracked. "Mom, I think I've made a mistake marrying her." It wasn't relief I felt. Not quite. It was something heavier, like watching a dam break and knowing the flood still had to run its course. "She's not well, David," I said gently. "And I don't think you've seen it clearly until now." He was quiet again. I imagined him pacing, rubbing the back of his neck like he always did when he was overwhelmed. That nervous tick I knew better than his own wife did. "I'm sorry," he said. Barely a whisper. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just nodded, smoothing the corner of the dish towel in my lap, over and over again. A habit. A thread of sanity. "Don't be sorry," I told him. "Just protect that boy. And yourself." We hung up not long after. There was no resolution, no plan, but the truth had cracked through the surface. And once that happens, it's only a matter of time before the rest crumbles. There was silence on the line. Not defensive, not surprised, just silence, heavy and ashamed. It filled the space between us like fog. I could almost hear him blinking, his mind catching up with a truth he'd been avoiding for too long. Then, softly, "I was never in the hospital." His voice broke on the word never. That moment, I'll never forget it. It wasn't the confession that hit hardest. It was the exhaustion in his tone. Like he'd been trying to outrun a shadow for years and finally realized it had been clinging to his back all along. I sat back in my chair, the one by the kitchen window where I watched the sparrows pick at the bird feeder. My cardigan was draped over my shoulders, sleeves pulled down like armor. Outside, a storm was rolling in, the sky turning that strange green-gray that always made Harold say, "Hope you closed the garage." "I didn't ask her to call you," David said. "She told me you were unstable. That you were trying to ruin us." I wanted to scream, not out of anger, but out of grief. For all the years he'd looked at me and not seen what was true. For the way Jenna had twisted not just words, but love. Instead, I reached for my mug of cooled tea. It tasted faintly of lemon and bitterness. I set it down without drinking. "I think I've made a mistake marrying her," he added. "You think?" I said before I could stop myself. The sarcasm slipped out, a reflex from decades of holding my tongue. He didn't defend her. That silence was an answer. "I'm forwarding everything," I told him. "The videos, the texts, the bank records, even the security footage from the hospital. You need to see what I've seen, not just hear it." He didn't argue. "Mom?" His voice faltered. "I need time." "Take it," I said. "But I'm not waiting in the dark anymore." I ended the call with a click as clean as a guillotine. And then I got to work. I pulled out the blue folder, now thick with printed emails, screenshots, statements. I sat at my desk with the old brass lamp on, illuminating every lie Jenna had fed me. The light buzzed softly, and I could smell the faint scent of paper and ink, comforting in its own way. I forwarded everything to David. And then I called Gerald. Told him it was time to update my will. By sundown, Jenna's name was stripped from every document she'd ever touched. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt free. David said he needed time. I gave it to him. Time to watch, to read, to sit in the quiet with no one whispering poison into his ear. He needed to see his world without the filter Jenna had so carefully painted over everything. While he processed, I moved methodically, like a woman preparing for a storm, not knowing when or how it would hit, only that it would. I didn't pace or fret. Instead, I cleaned out my file cabinet, shredded old electric bills, labeled envelopes, took out the recipe box and tucked a few of Sammy's drawings inside the lid for safekeeping. And I visited Gerald again. "Time to take her out of the will," I said simply, placing the folder on his desk. It smelled like vanilla paper and steel, his office always did. "Clean. Serious." He nodded. "We'll strike her from any claim on your estate, life insurance, and any remaining joint accounts. I'll also draft a provision that protects Sammy." "Please," I said, smoothing the corner of my blouse with 2 fingers. "Whatever happens next, he needs to be protected." Gerald adjusted his glasses. "It's the right move. You've done everything by the book." I took no joy in it. But there was strength in action, and that had to be enough. When I got home, I lit a candle, lavender and sage, and sat in the kitchen with a notebook. I didn't write a letter, not exactly. More like a record. For Sammy, one day. So he could know the truth, not the version whispered in the backseat of a car or filmed in forced sobs. The truth from his grandmother's own hand. I described how I used to hum him the lullaby, how he giggled when I danced with a dish towel in hand. I described the moment I first held him, the way he snuggled into my neck like he'd always known me. And then I wrote the words that had haunted me, "Please help Daddy." I wrote what it meant, what it cost, and how I had helped, just not the way Jenna wanted. I slid the notebook into the drawer next to my old recipe cards. Not hidden, just waiting. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and my shawl. The sky was a soft bruise, purple clouds gathering low. A storm was coming. I could smell it in the dirt, in the wind curling around the porch posts. And I wasn't afraid. I had done what I could. And I had done it cleanly. Now, all I had to do was wait for the storm to break. She pulled up in that spotless black SUV, tires crunching gravel with fury. I was pruning the hydrangeas in my front yard, garden gloves on, clippers in hand. The scent of soil and cut stems grounded me, even as her voice sliced through the air like broken glass. "You ruined everything," she screamed, stepping out of the car. I didn't move, just stood, one hand still resting on the bush. My gloves were damp, speckled with earth. The cardigan I wore was old, oatmeal-colored, and soft with age, hardly the image of a threat. But apparently, that's what I'd become to her. She stormed toward the porch, arms flailing, face red with rage. Her sunglasses slid down her nose as she shouted, "You think you can just erase me? You think you're better than me?" And then the police car pulled in behind her. 2 officers got out. One reached for his body cam, clicking it on with a calm efficiency that made me exhale. "Ma'am," the officer said, stepping between us, "you're in violation of a restraining order. Step back." Jenna didn't listen. She lunged, at me, at the air, at the whole world that had stopped bending to her will. Her voice cracked, high and wild, "You don't get to take him from me." But I wasn't alone. David had arrived just minutes before. He stepped onto the porch and said, clear and low, "Enough, Jenna." Her head whipped around. "You lied to my mother. You used my child," he said, walking down the steps slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "You're not the woman I thought I married." She collapsed onto the lawn, knees hitting the grass with a dull thud. And for the first time in all these years, no one rushed to her. Not David, not me, not even the officers. The birds kept chirping. The breeze rustled through the trees. Life went on. The officers approached and handcuffed her gently. She didn't resist, just sobbed into her palms, mascara streaking her cheeks like war paint washed away. David didn't look at her. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my son, not the stranger wrapped in another person's narrative, but my David. Shoulders squared, eyes clear. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Are you?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I watched as they placed Jenna in the back of the police car. The door shut with a final click. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood. And I knew, this wasn't over. Not legally, not emotionally, but it had begun to end. The unraveling, the entangling, and I was still standing. Gloves covered in dirt, heart still whole. David had always been soft-spoken, even as a child. He didn't shout. He didn't slam doors. He simply stepped forward, took Jenna by the elbow, and said her name in a tone that quieted the chaos around us. "Jenna," he said, voice low, almost tender. "You have to stop." Her eyes were wild, hair tangled from the wind, mouth trembling as if trying to form another lie. But nothing came, just tears and gasps, and a keening sound that reminded me of a wounded animal, cornered and desperate. "You lied to my mother," he continued. "You used my child." He didn't say, "our child." He said my child. That distinction wasn't lost on either of us. Jenna collapsed onto the lawn like someone had cut her strings. Her knees hit the grass, arms limp, shoulders shaking with sobs. But no one moved to comfort her. Not the officers. Not David. Not me. I stood on the porch, one hand on the wooden post, feeling the ridges under my palm like braille. My cardigan flapped slightly in the breeze, and the smell of cut hydrangeas lingered on my gloves. David turned toward me then. His expression was unreadable, part sorrow, part resolve. Behind him, the officers spoke quietly into radios, writing notes, finalizing the report. One of them glanced at me and nodded, respectful. Kind. The moment felt suspended, like we were all waiting for something else to break. Jenna curled into herself on the lawn, still crying, but now quieter. Almost silent. No more fire in her eyes. Just smoke. David didn't say anything else. He didn't reach for her. He didn't excuse her. He stood in the stillness, watching as the pieces of his life cracked open. And then he stepped away. Back onto the porch. Back to me. "Do you want to come in?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded once. I held the door open. He entered without hesitation, like a son coming home after a long, bitter winter. He slipped off his shoes, just like he used to, and walked into the living room where Sammy's crayon drawing still hung on the fridge. Outside, the officers helped Jenna to her feet. But inside? Inside, my house felt warm again. Not fixed, not healed, but no longer poisoned. And that was enough, for now. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every breath, every rustle of paper. I wore my navy skirt suit, the one I kept for weddings and funerals. It still fit, thank God, though the hem had faded a bit. I'd pinned my mother's brooch to the lapel, a small silver dove. For courage. The judge was a woman in her 60s, hair like iron wool, eyes sharper than a hawk's. She glanced down at the file, then looked at me. "You may proceed, Mrs. Carlson." I nodded and opened the flash drive case with shaking fingers. Gerald had transferred everything, videos, texts, timestamps. But I started with the lullaby. The one that had shattered me, and then helped me see clearly. It played on the monitor, Sammy, in his pajamas, clutching a little stuffed rabbit I'd given him on his 2nd birthday. His voice soft, a little off-key, singing our lullaby. Then that whisper. "I miss you, Nana, please help Daddy." Gasps rippled through the room. Even Jenna's lawyer blinked twice and glanced sideways at her. Jenna stared at the table. No remorse. No tears this time. Just silence. I stepped back, letting the weight of that moment speak for itself. Gerald rose, voice steady. "Your Honor, we submit this as evidence of deliberate emotional manipulation, using a minor child. This is not a misunderstanding. This is coercion." Jenna's lawyer stood, fumbling for a counterpoint. "There may have been emotional misunderstanding. Miscommunication. Our client believed she fabricated an emergency to extract $18,000, Gerald cut in. She used a child's voice as leverage." The judge raised her hand. Silence. Then she turned to Jenna. "Is there anything you wish to say?" For a long moment, I thought Jenna might finally own up. Might cry. Apologize. Explain. But she just shook her head. The gavel came down, quick and clean. "Temporary custody is hereby suspended pending a full psychological evaluation and counseling. Visitation restricted under supervision. A further hearing will determine permanent arrangements." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My blouse stuck to my back. The courtroom smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. But in that moment, it might as well have been a cathedral. David touched my elbow as we walked out. "Thank you," he said. I nodded. He wasn't just thanking me for today. He was thanking me for not giving up. For staying steady when everything tilted. For listening when no one else would. And for fighting, with grace. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a lullaby played in open court. It's a modest place, 2 bedrooms, beige walls, thin carpeting, but it's theirs. No more walking on eggshells. No more whispered lies or forced smiles. Just space. Real, blessed space to breathe. I helped them settle in. Folded linens. Stocked the pantry with pasta and tea. Brought over a basket of Sammy's favorite storybooks. The apartment smelled of new paint and fresh beginnings. I even brought over my old rocking chair, the one David used to fall asleep in, back when his knees were the size of apricots. Sammy ran to me on that first visit, arms open wide. "Nana," he cried, clutching me like I might vanish. His little hands were sticky from apple slices, his face flushed with joy. The real kind, uncoached, unforced. He brought out his toy piano, set it on the floor, and played a clumsy version of our lullaby. He hit the wrong notes, then giggled, the sound bubbling up like birdsong. "I practiced," he said. "All by myself." I clapped and kissed his forehead. I could tell. "You've got music in your bones." David watched from the kitchen, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. He looked older, worn thin, but clearer, grounded, like a man who had stepped back from a cliff and finally saw how close he'd come to falling. We shared tea that evening, chamomile for me, mint for him. Sammy had chocolate milk, which he spilled twice. I cleaned it up without a word. My hands moved on their own, the way they always did in times of peace. Rituals of care, woven back into our lives. David spoke slowly, haltingly, about therapy, custody battles, and the long road ahead. I just listened, smoothing the hem of my skirt as he talked. It's what mothers do, we listen when our children finally remember how to speak the truth. Outside, cicadas buzzed in the dusk. Sammy curled up beside me, rabbit in one hand, my shawl draped over his lap. He started humming again, soft, low, pure. The lullaby no longer made me cry. It was different now, not a plea, a memory, a promise, a thread, slowly stitching our broken family back together, one note, one smile, one evening at a time. Love isn't a tool, and a child's voice should never be forged into a weapon. Jenna did her damage, emotional, financial, spiritual. I won't pretend otherwise. I lost $18,000, a little more hair, and a great deal of trust. But what I gained, what I fought for, that's what matters. My grandson sings freely now, without someone pressing record or whispering cues behind the camera. He plays his toy piano with sticky fingers and genuine joy. When he says, "I love you, Nana," it's spontaneous, not scripted. And that, my friend, is worth more than all the savings in the world. David still has long roads to walk. He's in counseling, learning to unwind the knots Jenna left behind. He comes by every Sunday for lunch. I make soup. He washes dishes. We sit with the windows open, listening to birdsong and the hum of second chances. The house feels different, lighter. I still light my lavender candle most evenings. I still drink chamomile tea before bed. I still wear my old cardigans and smooth the hems of my blouses when I'm deep in thought. But I no longer wait for bad news in the dark. I sleep soundly, under the quilt my mother stitched by hand, knowing I protected what mattered. I listened to my instincts. I stood my ground, and I let justice, not vengeance, do its work. I kept every document in that blue folder. Every screenshot, every note. One day, I'll show Sammy. Not to make him feel guilt or sadness, but to show him what silence can cost, and what strength can protect. Because dignity doesn't scream, it steadies, it waits, it acts when it must. And it hums a lullaby that no lie can ever steal.